I'd like to speak about trade and commerce. I think most of the people talk about transportation, but this is part and parcel of it. But trade and commerce took place for several thousand years before the Manitoba and Nunavut border became in existence. In ancient times, three main groups of people used this area around the mouth of the Churchill River and adjacent mainland areas long before the traders came. And these are inhabitants of the area to this day. They're the Cree Indian, the Dene, and the Inuit. Archaeological studies have established the presence of Inuit groups in the area around Churchill from as early as 1500 BC, when the pre-Dorset people camped at the grounds and the gravel ridges of the Churchill West Peninsula. The Dorset people continued to live there around 500 BC. These were followed by the Thule Inuit around 1200 AD, and there are many. If you have a chance to visit Churchill, go across to the Fort Prince of Wales and you'll see many of the traditional cultural sites that are in that area north of the fort. Dene groups also used this area, but were more dependent on wood and for their housing requirements. So as you may understand, archaeological sites were non-existent in a lot of the cases where they presided, because wood will deteriorate. The Dene and Inuit traded commodities for wood, for sled runners, and poles for their tent structures. And in that same opportunities, the Inuit traded with the Dene at that time for large marine mammal bones for tool making. So some of us that think that we just started trading, we're traders, we're commerce people, the flow of traffic and commodities in Manitoba has happened in the last little while. Sorry, we're a little late, but we're still here, and we want to do the same things. There are many stories, and I'm not a writer or an archaeologist, so I can't refer them to you, but I give you one. Dene would leave piles of wood on the barren lands, and the Indian would come and pick them up and leave other commodities for exchange. There was no people around to transact these things. They just did by honor system, and primarily because the Inuit were scared of the Indian people because they used to fight more than once. We talk of many people that have, Inuit people that tried to venture into the woodland areas, and when they saw Dene people, they'd take right back out to the barren lands and go home. For some of the history buffs, Jens Monk spent the winter in 1619 to 1620 near the mouth of the Churchill River, and he wrecked a ship. I think people that know that his wreck is still under the water over there. This became a very good source of material. Like we talked about iron, we talked about wood. That became one of the Inuit's place of descent. Came down to Churchill River, looked in the water, waited for high tide, and collected some of the wood that was required, and their first exposure to iron. So all due respect to Samuel Hearne, the Dene and the Inuit were doing trade before Samuel Hearne decided to open a post there. Whalers seeking whales in Hudson Bay hired many of the Inuit to help in their whale trips, which greatly increased their familiarity with the area in the south of the bay. Once trading posts were established along the south end of the Hudson Bay, the Cree, the Dene, and the Inuit came to these posts on a regular trading basis. They would trade their furs for new modern things like knives, pots and pans, very little food stuff. But there's a small story. Those that people been into Rankin are familiar with Simon Kalmak. He runs a small freighting company in Rankin Inlet. He ferries stuff across the Hudson Bay via Bombardier. His grandfather told a story of his father. Sevikita was his father. Went to a trading post. He had 3 bear hides. He laid the bear hides out for trading. And the trader put different things on the hide. It's supposed to be an exchange, but he was 18 years old. He came with some other older people from Arbet. He grabbed the first thing that struck his eye, and it was a very nice knife. He took that and he walked out. If you did work with Simon Kaumak, he's become very astute at trading. It's not like his grandfather, because Simon does good work, but you will pay for it. So you guys going to go back there up north for trading? Go talk to Simon. He's learned that lesson from his grandfather, because he didn't think he thought that the exchange was 1 for 1. He didn't realize all the other stuff on top of that hide was also for purchase of that hide. Inuit people traveled to these posts all along the West Hudson Bay, bringing furs to trade by dog team, eventually by small boat and freighters. One only needs to visit the Eskimo Museum in Churchill to realize how strong the connections are between Churchill and the North. Displays of artifacts and carvings from across the North, collected by the Roman Catholic priests who served in the Arctic from this dais. And if you have a chance to go to Churchill, do visit the museum. You're going to get a walking tour of the history of that whole region. As for myself, I was born in Pistol Bay. Those that fly know where Pistol Bay is, between Whale Cove and Rankin Inlet. And when I was 9, our family moved down to Churchill during the starvation. Some of you guys that are familiar with the starvation in the 50s. We moved down to Churchill. At that time, the military was there, and they're redeveloping the community. We grew up there, playing around the harbor, I ran a paper route by dog team, for those that don't know if I'm an entrepreneur or not. I had the biggest paper route in probably Canada. It's quite unique, because we had the military, we're talking about the Canadian Army, the Canadian Navy, US Army, US Air Force, and they were marveled at the opportunity to have I'm probably the most photographed person in Churchill at that time, because people want to take a picture of my paper boys running his dog team, delivering my paper to me. And some of you guys know my brother George Hickes from Manitoba. He was my associate. He looked after the dogs, and he delivered the paper, and I just waited for him. I say that to him today. During the time that we talked about, in the 20s to the 50s, there were some very notable trappers in the Kivalliq region. And some of these names you may remember. I know Mike certainly will. Johnny Voisey, Sevi Kita, John Karitak, Leo Kalujak. These people would make their twice annual trip by dog team from Wager Bay, Baker Lake, Rankin Inlet, Arbet, to trade for furs. So these were seasoned travelers. Once the winter season finished, they acquired, because of their entrepreneurship, they acquired boats, and they traveled down to Churchill by boat. They'd go down, load up their little boats with freight. I think there's a few pictures of those smaller boats. And they'd take them back to the communities. And these are, again, some other people with different venues in business. David Satiana, Robert Taddy, Louis and John Voisey, Pierre and Baptiste Tutu, Leo and Joe Kalujak, Louis and Edmund Pilakapsi. These people owned boats, and they ferried and resupplied some of the smaller communities prior to tug and barge, ship, and larger aircraft. And then the other component comes because we don't have a road. We're working on that, by the way. We had cat trains. Those were larger mechanical dog teams. They had large sleds, and now they do the freighting. And in this sense, Simon Kaumak is a freighter. Baptiste Tutu is a freighter. Ivo Elvo is a freighter. Hamish Taddy and the M&T Corporation is a freighter. They do this now by challengers with large sleds, and they're not traveling 4 miles an hour. They're traveling 25 to 30 miles an hour with tons of material that they're towing. As we escalated further into the development of the territory, air transportation became a forefront. The Kivalliq region has a long history as a trade partner with Manitoba, and this partnership often came about as a result of aviation. Many Manitoba-based aviation services came into the Arctic to move goods, people, and provide service to prospectors, doctors, mining companies, tourists, Geophysics Survey of Canada, and many other organizations that ventured into the north. These aviation companies included companies like this. Some of you guys are probably younger than some of these companies. Central Northern Airways out of Lac du Bonnet, Lamere out of the Pas, Tom Lamb out of Ontario, Barney Lamb out of Churchill Base, Arctic Wings, Transair, Calm Air, Skyward, Kivalliq Air. These all had a very strong role to play in the development of the north. And quite often one would see beavers, otters, and I'm saying aircraft, not the animal. Jackson Air Services would go to Cross Lake Air Service and Lynn Lake. Air service such as these mentioned assisted in the opening of the Kivalliq region to the south. They provide medical travel for patients during the TB epidemics that throughout the 1950s and 60s. Some of you guys remember the medical profession would understand that. Airplanes were key in developing the coastal settlements who knew, as you know today, are moving people from their camps to the establishment posts in the communities. There are stories and written people who talked about pilots like Punch Dickens, Gunnar Ingebrigtsen, Tom Lamb, Ernie Buffett. But my favorite person is, most of you guys know him, Bonner Scott. Homegrown. All operating out of the Manitoba and flying at very difficult situations to provide flying services to the Inuit and others of interest in the region. Aviation opened up the Barren Lands to prospectors, modern aircraft, where I missed on my line again. But if you guys remember the older people, Norsemen were one of the major components of flying into our region at that time. But today you see aircraft like ATRs, Saab, Metro 1900s, King Airs, 737, and I understand from First Air 767s. He's never going to turn around in Rankin's terminal, I guarantee you that.